Welcome to today's Explainer. Okay, today we are putting on our history professor hats to decode some of the absolutely most famous parables in human history. We're looking at the ancient text of Matthew 13, but we aren't looking at it as a sermon. Instead, we're going to analyze these parables as brilliantly structured pieces of historical literature. We're stepping back in time to figure out exactly how a first-century audience would have actually heard and understood these incredibly vivid metaphors. To really get this text from the original audience's perspective, we have to start by asking the exact same question the disciples asked their teacher right there in the narrative: why speak to the multitudes using these kind of cryptic agricultural metaphors? Like, why not just come right out and say what you mean? It's honestly a brilliant structural question, and it's asked by the characters within the text itself.
And, well, the text actually provides its own fascinating literary justification. It quotes the ancient prophet Esaias to explain that parables serve a really specific dual purpose. Basically, they act as a filter. They're designed to conceal mysteries from those with closed eyes and dull ears, people who just aren't really paying attention, while simultaneously revealing profound truths to those who are genuinely seeking understanding. It's this incredibly interactive teaching tool that literally requires the listener's active participation.
So, our syllabus for this explainer covers 5 key themes: sowers, seeds, and soils, sabotaged in the fields, the power of scale, treasures of great price, and finally, the final harvest.
Let's jump right into part 1, sowers, seeds, and soils.
Picture this. In the ancient Near East, farmers obviously didn't have mechanized tractors, right? They literally walked their fields, hand-sowing seeds by broadly tossing them across mixed, highly uneven terrains. And the narrative uses 4 distinct types of soil to categorize exactly how an audience receives the metaphorical word of the kingdom. If the seed hits the hard wayside, it gets eaten by birds, meaning the message is snatched away immediately. Seed that lands on stony places, it springs up but dies in the sun. That represents folks who receive the word with joy, but, well, they quit the second persecution hits. Then you have the seed among thorns, which gets choked out, perfectly symbolizing the distractions of worldly cares and the deceitfulness of riches. But finally, the seed on good ground actually takes root and produces fruit.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is the specific yield mentioned. The text says the good ground yields 30, 60, and up to 100-fold return. Now, to a modern year, that's just, a nice multiple. But to a first-century farmer, where a really great harvest yielded maybe a 10-fold return, 100-fold is a staggering, completely hyperbolic number. It represents an unimaginably massive, miraculous harvest, and it really emphasizes the absolutely limitless potential of that good ground.
Moving on to section 2, sabotage in the fields.
Here, the text introduces a botanical adversary known as tares. Historically, this is almost certainly referring to darnel, which is a poisonous weed that, in its early growth stages, looks completely 100% identical to wheat. The context clues in the text tell us these tares are the literal offspring of an enemy's sabotage, maliciously planted in the dead of night. Metaphorically, this represents the children of the wicked one growing directly alongside the children of the kingdom. It's literally ancient agricultural warfare being used to explain the coexistence of good and evil in the world.
But notice the deliberate procedural restraint in this narrative sequence. The servants discover the sabotage and, naturally, they want to rip out the weeds immediately. But the householder commands them to wait. Why? Well, because the roots of the tares and the wheat are completely intertwined beneath the soil. Pulling up the weeds early would accidentally root up the valuable wheat right along with them. So the master says wait until the final harvest. It's just a masterful literary way to explain divine patience, delaying judgment to protect the good until the ultimate end when the reapers, who the text identifies as angels, can safely separate and burn the tares.
All right, section 3, the power of scale. The author structurally emphasizes explosive, totally outsized outcomes by contrasting a single grain of mustard seed with its final form. The text describes the mustard seed as the least of all seeds, tiny, obscure, almost microscopic, right? Yet it eventually grows into the greatest among herbs, becoming a massive tree capable of housing the birds of the air. The crucial point here is that disproportionate scale. The ancient audience is being taught that something vast and universally accommodating can start in an incredibly humble, microscopic way. And then the text mirrors this exact idea, but it moves from the agricultural field straight into the domestic kitchen. It uses the imagery of a woman hiding leaven or yeast inside 3 measures of meal.
Again, the leaven is tiny and completely hidden from view, but it initiates this quiet, totally invisible, and unstoppable chemical process that eventually and inevitably transforms the entire batch of dough from the inside out. Both the mustard seed and the leaven beautifully illustrate massive transformative growth starting from virtually nothing. That brings us to Section 4, Treasures of Great Price.
Consider these two rapid-fire micro-narratives. In the first one, a man just stumbles upon treasure hidden in a field. In the second, a dedicated merchant is actively searching for pearls and finds one of supreme value. So one finds it by accident, the other by searching. But notice how both characters react in the exact same absolute way. They joyfully liquidate absolutely everything they own to obtain it. Now, in the ancient world, selling your entire livelihood was a radical, almost crazy act of sacrifice. The literary point here is crystal clear. The kingdom of heaven is of such supreme, overwhelming worth that trading your entire existence for it isn't some heavy burden, it's a wildly joyful transaction.
And finally, Section 5, the final harvest.
We now arrive at the culmination of the text's overarching literary arc. The narrative turns to the very familiar procedural steps of ancient commercial fishing on the Sea of Galilee. A massive dragnet is cast into the sea, and it pulls in absolutely everything. Good fish, bad fish, random debris, every kind, as the text says. Once the net is drawn completely full to the shore, the fishermen actually sit down and systematically sort the catch. The text explicitly explains this as a stark metaphor for the end of the world, where angels will sever the wicked from the just, casting the bad into a furnace of fire. It's this incredibly dramatic, conclusive bookend to that earlier parable of the tares.
The text then beautifully concludes its lesson with what is essentially one final meta-parable. It compares an instructed scribe to an ancient householder who pulls both new and old things from his treasure. And honestly, this is a perfect metaphor for what the original audience was being asked to do themselves. They were being asked to synthesize these radical new teachings, these brand new parables, with their existing historical and scriptural worldview. They weren't just chucking the old out the window, they were bringing forth both the old and the new together to fully understand the kingdom.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider how much richer, how much more vibrant a text becomes when we take the time to understand its everyday symbols exactly as the original historical audience would have experienced them. The seeds, the tares, the dragnets, the staggering hundredfold harvest, these definitely weren't just nice little stories. They were deeply resonant, perfectly targeted metaphors designed to make complex philosophies totally accessible to everyday people. So what ancient symbols in your own reading might be hiding profound truths, just waiting for you to decode them? Keep digging, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.